Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Tales from the Triptych. I'm Soul Nate. It's my turn to host this week, and I will be talking about shipwrecked porcelain and pottery. I have our friends here, Patrick from Trusty Huckster Mercantile, and Katie from Vintage and Vinyl.
Hi, everybody.
Well, hi, guys.
Nice to see you again.
It's great
Thanks for
to
having
be
us
here.
on. Looking forward to this.
Well, I've been doing a lot of homework. I have done a YouTube video in the past about my collection of shipwreck porcelain, which received a lot of views. This time I'm not focusing quite so much on my own collection, but more on some of the more elaborate and expensive pieces out there that are for sale and private collections. So hopefully we will get to look at some great things and get to look at the prices that you could pay to own these precious objects.
How awesome, Nate. I'm very excited about this one.
Now, I can't see the chat, so Patrick and Katie, could you say hello to anyone if we've in fact got anyone here?
Oh,
Absolutely.
we've got lots of people here. People are definitely looking forward to this one. Peterson, of course, is joining us as well as Cam's Folly, Deb Sherman, got Carrie from Austin, KCATX, Tiger's here, Linda Punky, and our favorite name, Fluffy Otter. Fluffy
Yes.
Otter 1. I guess there's more than one of them. So Fluffy Otter 1 has joined us.
That's great.
Who else do you
And
see, Katie?
Edward is here, Al Unico, Thrifter and Treasures. We've got Maria, Empty Nesting 2, tuning in. I think we said hello to Peterson and Debbie from Chicago. So lots of great folks in the chat tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. And Tammy's here from Tammy Renee Walker.
Great. Hello. Welcome, everyone. So as I said, I'm going to be talking about shipwrecked pottery and porcelain. And I have selected 7 shipwrecks to discuss and show some of the objects from. The first one being the Nanking cargo. This is probably one of the most famous of the shipwrecks, simply because it was one of the first to be salvaged in modern days. It caused a huge stir in the community of collectors and dealers and museums and art galleries. This particular ship sank in 1752. It was named the Nanking cargo because the people who discovered it felt that the pieces of porcelain looked like those pieces of porcelain that were produced in Nanking.
Nate, have you started showing the porcelain? We're still seeing the
sorry.
icon.
Okay, here we go. Thanks, Patrick. So it was in fact a Dutch ship named the Glademulsen. It was discovered by a well-known marine archaeologist, Michael Hatcher, who was the Salvage manager in 1983. There were 100,000 pieces of porcelain salvaged from this particular wreck. There were gold ingots, there were cannons, and there was about 687,000 pounds of tea also found in the wreckage. It sank near Java, Indonesia. They never renamed the wreck the Glademulsen. It's always been known as the Nanking cargo. Hatcher himself was really strongly criticized by heritage advocates because the removal of the ship's saleable cargo took precedence over a more serious archaeological investigation of the site. Now, here we have a shot of some of the pieces in the cargo, and you can see the huge amount of stacked saucers here. Quite an incredible array.
That is quite a lot of saucers, Nate.
Yeah, I have some saucers, but they look very similar to this, but are not from the Nanking. I don't have any Nanking in my collection. It always seems to be just out of reach financially for me. Interesting. This lot was sold in Amsterdam at Christie's in Amsterdam. And let's go on to our next page. This is a beautiful set of tea bowls and saucers. which was estimated to sell at $3,000 to $5,000 US dollars, and hit right in the middle of that.
Now,
And this
Nate, a question. A lot of what we see or we hear about for, basically anything shipping or cruise ship restaurant ware would be stuff that would actually have been used to serve meals on a ship. You're talking about 1750. Is this when they dug up when they found the shipwreck and they found all this porcelain? Was this something that was being used, or was this being shipped for selling? Why is there so much of one pattern found
This
in
is
these
definitely
shipwrecks?
cargo. This is definitely cargo. This was meant for the European market. At this particular stage, this is around 1750, and it was at 1750 to 1755 that the English finally managed to crack the formula for hard paste porcelain. So up until this date, the only way that hard paste porcelain was found in Europe was to have it imported from China.
So what did they, I know this goes into a totally different triptych, but just as a comparison, what would the China have looked like that they would have been using prior to this?
Well, in Europe, you mean?
Yes.
They wouldn't have been using China unless it was Chinese import ware. They weren't using porcelain. They were still using pottery, clayware that was fired at lower temperatures. They would be using pewter. They'd be using wood, and the upper class would be using plates and dishes made of sterling.
Excellent. Thank you.
One apparently at this particular auction, one unidentified European bidder paid $282,258 for a 360-piece dinner service, which made it the most expensive dinner service to ever be sold at auction. This is in the National Museum of Australia. Very typical dish. And here on Invaluable, there are a number, 3 lots, I think, of, I know we've got a few more, of the Nanking cargo.
Nate, you said that was a typical dish. So is there a theme that was on all of these china plates?
There were variations, mainly variations on black and white porcelain. I'm sorry, blue and white porcelain, excuse me. There were some pieces here, as you can see, that had more multi-chrome finish to it, but the vast majority was of blue and white. Here's a grouping here of pieces. I can go into this group. Right. Okay. So this is a fine set, and it is estimated to go, it's right in that, estimated between 300 and 400 pounds. Its opening bid would start at 260 pounds. I'm not sure of the conversion rate to the US dollar, but 300 pounds would equate to 600 New Zealand dollars. It's usually about 50%. But this is a nice collection here. This brown outer is very common on a lot of these pieces in the Nanking. And here's the Nanking cargo sticker in situ on all of the pieces.
Can you tell us a little bit about the sticker, Nate? What does that mean? And as far as collecting goes, is that really the best way to prove that this is a legitimate piece?
It is. Collectors want that sticker. They want the sticker for a number of reasons. It guarantees that it was part of the legitimate salvage, which is important in many ways. One of the reasons would be that these particular pieces have been made for years, for hundreds of years, and they're still made today. And you could, in essence, saturate or bury underwater modern pieces of porcelain that after a very short time would have the external patina that a piece that had been submerged for hundreds of years would have. Another reason is that the pieces that the local people in these areas do collect these pieces, and rather than the pieces being for personal interest and personal wealth, because they are in these waters, they're not in international waters, then they're domestic waters, they belong to the country, and they are an important source of income for that country. And rather than that wealth of that sale going to an individual, it goes to the country itself. Also, the process of salvaging is quite a complex one. When the pieces are found and actually brought up, they are held in the same seawater that they're found in, so that the salinity level is the same. And then there's a process where they are submerged in ever decreasing levels of salinity in water. And this acts as a leaching method, which takes the salt out of the item, out of the object. It's always drawn into water that is a lower salinity. And it's done progressively over many different runs, continuing to have a decline in the level of salt. If that doesn't happen, once that piece dries out, the salt crystals reform. That formed breakages. It can form chips. It can make the glaze pop off in places. And so a piece that's literally is bought from those people who aren't part of the salvage won't have necessarily gone through the painstaking process of ensuring that that piece remains stable. And also there's the last reason, which is that those people who are getting, these local people who are trying to get these pieces from the sea, are using methods where they attach nets to metal hooks, they dredge the sea floor, and probably 95% of what they get up, they damage in the process of doing it.
Interesting. Now, Poodle has a good question related to this. She's asking, do these pieces need extensive restoration?
Some pieces do. Some pieces come up looking more or less exactly as they did when they were put on their journey to being shipped. There are so many pieces in the market that collectors, more often than not, can wait until a perfect or near perfect example comes along. We'll see a bit later that there will be some pieces that are and have marine incrustations on them. There's another shipwreck a little bit later, the Kamal, that has evidence of a fire aboard the ship which sunk it. And collectors do like to have examples with that incrustation and with those burn marks. I know, now, Patrick, you like your things to be perfect, and as a rule, I do as well, but I have pieces that have got marine incrustation and burn marks on them.
Now, that's actually, this is a personal, I think there's a couple of questions that we'll have to cover, but since you said that, it makes me really wonder, like you said, there's a lot of people, they can wait until a pristine piece comes out, but if it was damaged, or if it was lost because of a shipwreck, wouldn't it be natural that the pieces would be damaged? So value-wise, what tends to be more valued? Is it a pristine piece that was just sunk, or something that was actually damaged as part of the shipwreck, as opposed to, I found it interesting too, that they could damage it as they're lifting it out of from the sea? What tends to be the more valuable items?
Well, some shipwrecks have literally hundreds of thousands of pieces that are salvaged. Others have much, much less. So there are shipwrecks like the Diana, which we'll talk about later, have considerably less pieces that were made available to the market. And of course, that market scarcity drives the price up. So a piece of damaged Diana might well go for considerably more than an undamaged piece of Kamal, simply because the numbers of the Diana aren't there.
So, okay, Nate, would it be accurate to say that pieces that do not have the sticker on it are fakes, or are there some pieces that don't have the sticker that are legitimate? But
there certainly would be less fakes, but more that are in essence salvaged by locals and haven't gone through the proper channels. I'd say there'd be more of those pieces than actual fakes. There's always the issue which lies in the background of faked labels.
Yes.
Which is something that is talked about amongst groups of people that collect these things. But again, you know, no one I know or nothing that I've seen has indicated that there has been in fact, fake label.
Would it be obvious, the fake labels, or are they really, really tough to tell apart?
Most of the labels are paper stickered, gum-backed paper stickers. That would be probably extremely easy to forge, I imagine. But most often there is enough pieces in the marketplace, and collectors, when they would be sold through auction houses, most auction houses are quite familiar with dealing with these pieces. So I would hope that any pieces with fake labels would be caught.
Now, this goes back to one of the things you had mentioned earlier. So as we're talking about the collectability and what prices can get realized, you had mentioned, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of the shipwreck, but you said it was the most expensive piece of, like it was a 165 piece dinnerware service or something like that. Are people trying to buy massive quantities, or was that person who's paid that much for that set was the intention to buy it and then split it up and resell?
I'm not sure. The particular buyer was unidentified, and it was a 360 piece dinner service. There was Nanking fever at the time. The Chinese government felt that the salvage, the hoard itself, should have been theirs. They were unsuccessful in that bid. When it went to auction in Christie's in Amsterdam, there were Chinese delegates there that were ready to bid, but the opening bids actually proved to be too high for the Chinese to actually repatriate these pieces.
Interesting. Okay, so it's kind of a unique situation because of that specific. But like looking at these pieces showing here, you're showing just like 1, 4, 3. I would think that's probably more the norm that comes up as opposed to the massive sets.
Most certainly. And having these broken down into smaller pieces allows more collectors to have a representation of that particular shipwreck in their collection. I mean, this has an opening bid of £140 for this one bowl. That is probably a reasonably good price for that. This set of saucers, I think these are saucers rather than plates. These four.
Now, I've heard of phones, Garfield phones in particular, washing up on shore, but do these pieces ever get washed up?
No, they seldom get washed up. They would more likely, as they are often discovered and found originally, coming up in fishermen's nets.
Oh, interesting.
And these 4 pieces here of an opening bid, which hasn't actually achieved an opening bid of £140, which to me seems like an extremely reasonable price.
And one of the questions was how, and I apologize if I missed this, but did you explain how you started or what your first pieces were and how you started collecting this?
Like many of my collections, it's a good question, Patrick. Like many of my collections came from my addiction to the English Antiques Roadshow television series. It was an episode where it was, and in fact, it was the Nanking cargo. A collector bought in a collection of pieces from the Nanking cargo, and I was fascinated by it. And like my Stuart Devlin eggs, sterling silver eggs, once I had seen that profile, I almost immediately, probably within moments of the episode finishing, went onto eBay to see if I could actually get some of these things for myself, which I eventually did.
Now, is eBay the place that you buy most of your shipwreck porcelain, or are you also going onto auction sites as well?
When I was collecting, I'm not actively collecting at the moment. When I was, most all, not all, but most of those pieces were from eBay. I did find one piece from the Hoi An, which is a very old wreck. This particular piece here, I bought this at auction in Sydney, and I think that I put in an absentee bid for this. I think I was working, and I think I put in a maximum bid of 300, and I believe I got it for about 150 Australian dollars.
Neat, Nate. Now, you mentioned that on auction websites, you probably would be able to get them authenticated, so to speak, because the people at the auction would know the fake stickers really well. On eBay, I would assume that's harder. So, was that something you were concerned about at the time, or did you just trust that the sticker was legitimate?
I did trust that the sticker was legitimate, and also I was buying essentially from the lower end of the market. I wasn't buying huge elaborate pieces. I was buying pieces that were common in their numbers, that had come up, like the saucers, where there are literally thousands of them stacked. So I wasn't paying big bucks for them by any means. I think at the time when I was purchasing pieces, these cosmetic jars, for instance, from the Hoi An hoard, I think I was paying probably about $30 or $40 each for these. I don't think that price is still what these are at. I think they have increased significantly in prices, certainly the last time I looked. So perhaps if I was spending more thousands of dollars on more elaborate and larger pieces, I may well have been more reticent to spend that money without being sure that the pieces were absolutely genuine. I'm convinced the pieces in my collection are genuine. This lovely piece from the Kamal, as I say, this has the marine incrustations on it.
Now, carrying forward, Katie's question, that the idea that were you sure it was legitimate? And you may not know the answer to this, or maybe you've experienced it. I don't know the answer. Does eBay protect you on things like that? If you were to buy something that says it was legitimately and it had the sticker and it turns out that it was false, do you have any protection? Is that something that, and maybe Katie knows this or people in the chat, is there any level of protection? Because eBay obviously is not going to want to support anyone who's actively trying to deceive. But for something like this, I'm kind of curious what kind of recourse there would be for something if we know.
I think eBay does provide buyer protection. In fact, I'm reasonably sure of it. Certainly auction houses have buyer protection as well. If you were to buy anything from a reputable auction house that turned out later to be a fake or a forgery, I think they are bound within their auctioneer's license to make restitution on that.
That's a good point.
They do. eBay does. I bought a Coca-Cola tray a few years ago, and it turned out that it was totally a fake, and the lady believed it was an original, and I paid a good price for it. So I called eBay because the lady wasn't being very helpful, and they said, oh, yes, we'll refund you immediately. So they do. But Teophane's making a good point. He said, I'm surprised the sticker would have not dissolved after so many years in seawater. And Nate, I think you were saying that these stickers actually were added on afterwards when the wreck
That's right. That's right. The stickers were added after the piece had gone through the process of remediation from salt water, and that would have been done in the cataloguing and packing process to be sent to the auction house. So the stickers aren't contemporaneous with the shipwreck, they are with the salvage.
Interesting. Thank you, Nate.
And here we've got a few more pieces. Again, this here is a pair of tea bowls and saucers with an £80 opening bid. I think that's more than reasonable. This is a polychrome example. It's possible that this was originally a polychrome as well. The red color is the first to degrade in seawater. So it's often found that there are identical pieces with absolute minute traces of the red oxide and the glaze in them. whereas some are slightly more protected, especially in shipwrecks these were often packed in tea themselves for protection, and often that tea could protect the piece from the degradation of the salt water. But to me, 80 pounds is more than reasonable for a piece like this.
Now, you had mentioned that the labels are contemporaneous to the salvage or the recovery, or at least the cleaning process. What's the earliest salvage that would be doing that? I mean, the idea of labeling isn't necessarily, like to Tim's point, that's not necessarily something that would have happened 300 years ago. How, like, were shipwrecks that were recovered in the 1800s, where those would have been labeled?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm only really sort of focusing on more modern shipwrecks. All of these come basically from about 1983 is the oldest salvage that I'll be talking about. I couldn't really speak to salvages that had happened before then. But all of the shipwrecks that I'll be talking about were all extensively catalogued after salvage and before being sent to the auction houses.
Now, that's interesting. It took that long for some of these shipwrecks to be, was it that they weren't located, or they just didn't have the equipment to salvage them?
There are instances that shipwrecks were found, and it took several years before the salvage attempts actually went underway. That can usually be attributed to the sea depth of the wreck, or possibly the weather conditions around the location of the wreckages. Often those weather conditions are the reason for the shipwrecks in the first place.
Now, do these pieces get any tea staining? Because you did mention that they were packed sometimes in tea, and that preserves them. So I'm curious about that.
I've not seen pieces that appear to be tea stained or are labelled as having tea staining. So I don't believe so. I'm not sure if that's something to do with the salinity of the water. This, again, 140 pounds for a reasonably large plate is not a bad price. I don't think that's a bad price at all. 28 centimeters. There is tiny bit of fretting to the edge, which may be the reasons behind this is a slightly more reasonable price. But I don't think this is unacceptable condition for the average collector. Now, if we go into eBay and have a look at what is online and for sale at the moment, this is a very humble little tea bowl and saucer that sold for $190 US dollars. These are actually sold items. Large piece here that managed to achieve $760. Here's a piece here that has been seriously degraded by the seawater. It's lost almost all of its patterning and design, and the $82.25 really reflects the condition of that. That seems like a very reasonable price for this polychrome tea bowl.
Now, Tiger has an interesting question. He's asking, do they know who would have used these dishes on the ships? Was it everyone or just higher ranks?
Well, these particular pieces are all cargo. So these are not pieces that are used by the passengers, if there were any, or the crews. These would literally have been packed up and been sent as cargo.
Ah, right. Okay, that makes sense.
And I can see why this particular piece only achieved 1350, almost, of 1350 pounds, that it's possibly Nanking cargo. It has no label. I don't think that is Nanking personally. I've not seen a piece of Nanking that is polychrome and that fresh, or with such a nasty crack in it.
Now, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, and I'm not familiar with this subject enough, and so I'm fascinated by everything you're saying. But I know that just ships in general, Mayflower, just about anything that travels the sea, they always would need something for ballast, the weight in the bottom of the ships. So is there a difference between like the export ware that you were talking about that would have been headed to England, that I would assume would have been really well packaged. It would have been, padded and wrapped up so it wouldn't have been damaged. Are ballast pieces technically still the same, or are those more like cheaper pottery and porcelain that may have been damaged even during the ship sailing? Is there a difference in the stuff that's recovered?
Well, that's an interesting question. The question of ballast. Ballast is a very interesting topic. Ballast, if people aren't sure, is weight that is put into a ship to lower its center of gravity, to have the ship be lower in the water. That means that the journey is much smoother. Ships that ride high in the water, it's a rough journey. It's an unsafe journey. So there is ballast and there's ballast cargo. At the time of this shipwreck, the 1750 odd, they may well have considered this to be acceptable ballast for the journey, but it was ballast cargo. It was prime cargo. It was cargo that was going to attract a lot of money for sale should it actually make its destination. Ballast is also really important for the loading and unloading of cargo into ships. When a ship is moored, when the crewmen are unloading the cargo, if it is heavy cargo, ballast cargo, the ship runs the danger of popping up in the water like a cork, which makes the process of unloading very dangerous and very difficult. So often in those situations when cargo is being taken off a ship, cargo is being put, or ballast cargo is being placed back on the ship to keep that ship low in the water. So if there's no heavy cargo that ship is going to take back on its return journey, ballast could be rocks, stones, dirt, sand that would need to be simultaneously placed onto the ship to keep it stable while heavy cargo was being taken off. Nowadays, ballast is managed with sealed compartments that are filled or emptied with pumps of seawater.
That's all fat. I had no idea. I didn't even think about this type of unloading and loading. So that's actually really fascinating.
I think that's probably where ballast is at its most important. This is a really interesting piece here. This is very similar to some of the pots that I have from a different shipwreck. Mine are from the Hoi An. But again, this is a really pretty little cosmetic pot for $78 US. So again, it's surprising to think that for a very modest $78 US, you could own something, a piece of shipwreck porcelain, something that's spent hundreds of years at the bottom of the ocean, was made in the middle of the 18th century, for the same amount of money that everyone here in the community has been at sales and seen modern pieces of glass or ceramic selling for well more than $78 US.
Now, Tim's got some interesting questions here. He is asking if the exporters had their cargo insured, and are there any surviving insurance records?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know. That's a very good question. Many of these ships were part of the fleet of the Dutch East India Company, which was the largest company in the world at that time. And I have a vague memory that there was an arm of this particular organization, the Dutch East Indies, that was an insurer. So it's a great question. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
Interesting. Thank you, Nate.
So here, a really modest little tea bowl and saucer. That's a pretty good return on such a modest piece. Another one, $212, $205 for about the same. So I would say that a tea bowl and saucer of good quality seems to have a market value of somewhere between $160 and $200.
Quick question, just based on that, and I may have missed when you explained it initially with this, with who is doing the stickers. These are all saying that they have Christie's stickers, and I was tying it more to the recovery process. Just makes me wonder, is it the auction houses that were involved with the recovery, or were they who then the recovery team, once they picked all this stuff up, they then worked with Christie's to do all of the documentation, and it was that Christie's did the label?
There is a label that's associated with the wreck, and the Christie's had their own label as well. So you'll actually find that many or most pieces actually have more than one label. So this here is in essence written onto the piece. This is a catalog number, and this is an auction label. And you'll find, let's see if we can find something from, what have we got on this one here? So we again have a number of labels onto here. This one with a barcode. This is the Salvage label. I assume this is the auction barcode label. There's even a handwritten label here.
So who would have paid for the Salvage label? Is that the Salvage company?
I imagine the Salvage company, yes.
Okay, so they would do all of this, get it all labeled, and then after it would then go to Christie's, and then it just becomes like another piece of an auction.
That's right.
Okay. So Christie's wasn't necessarily involved in the recovery of these pieces.
No, they weren't. But Christie's was obviously heavily involved in the cataloging of those pieces for the sales. So that is pretty much all on the Nanking, and I might just snip on to the next shipwreck, the Vung Tau.
Now, so Nate, I've got a question for you. I'm sorry
sure.
to interrupt, but are there any surviving records from exporters that can kind of identify how many pieces actually were in these shipwrecks, or is it just whatever they find?
Well, this particular shipwreck that they had named the Nanking, but actually turned out to be the Dutch ship, the Glaudermassen, there would have been extensive records of that, and they would have learned. I don't really have the numbers to compare between what the original manifest was in comparison to what the salvage number was, unfortunately.
Interesting. Thank you, Nate.
So if we move on to the next one, that's the Vung Tau. Oh, here we go. This is a little modest piece, very modest piece from the Vung Tau. This is an early sinking. This sunk in about 1690, was salvaged in about 1990 from the South China Sea, and it was off the islands of Condal. This ship was an unusual ship insofar that it had both Chinese and Portuguese influences in its manufacture. This particular ship traveled the same route that many of them had, from China en route to Jakarta to the Dutch East India Company, where they would those things would be those cargo items would be then put onto bigger ships and sent to Europe. Excuse me. They have found from this particular wreck, this is a very small wreck in comparison to many others, there was about 48,200 or thereabout pieces of Qin Dynasty porcelain. The total price, the total earnings from the sale of this particular wreck was approximately $7.3 million. And unlike many of the wrecks, the Vung Tau Museum in Vietnam took a single item as an example of every artifact that was found. And here again, these are coffee pots. So these are made for the European market. They are heavily damaged, but the fact remains that there are so few of these pieces that these are still very strong in the market. It actually calls them milk jugs. I'm not sure why they would do that.
They're absolutely beautiful.
I don't have any price achieved on this particular item. Not that I can see. And again, the same sort of pot we saw earlier. This is the cover of a catalog, an auction catalog, which shows some of the range of these particular pieces.
It is absolutely amazing to me, Nate, that not a single one of these pieces shown here that I can tell has any damage. And those lids are pretty fragile.
Indeed. Of course, this represents the cream of the crop, I think, and there would have been many more pieces that were damaged that simply aren't shown. Here's some other pieces. These are larger pieces, larger vases. Excuse me.
Now, you may not know the answer to this. I'm sorry, Nate, but you may not know the answer to this, but just kind of like what you were saying, that was the cream of the crop, and what Katie was mentioning. If museums pick these up, are they going to show these as pieces of quote unquote shipwreck porcelain? Or are they picking these up to say, okay, cool, we have a 1990 find from something made in the 1600s. Do they just exhibit it as a piece of 17th century porcelain?
No, I would think without exception, it would be exhibited as a piece of shipwreck porcelain. You know, museums are, in essence, the halls of academia. They're all about learning. They're all about teaching. And museums would be the buyer that would be very interested in having pieces that were in perfect condition and having pieces that were in the condition of being burnt or having marine incrustation, because it tells the story. It makes for an interesting exhibition. We will come across on one of the shipwrecks, I think it's the Kamal, where there are some pieces that are called shipwreck sculptures. And those are pieces where the fire that was aboard on board this particular wreck was burning so fast, so hot and so strong that it remelted the glazes of bowls and fused them together in this very sculptural manner.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Now, this is a very modest, not particularly attractive piece from the Vung Tau. But again, it is a legitimate piece from circa 1690, sold for a very modest 100 New Zealand dollars. So I think that's actually about 70 US dollars. Here on Invaluable, there are 2 lots for sale. This is 9 pieces, and it has its starting bid is only $200, which again seems more than reasonable. This is a particularly beautiful lot. So we've got, here we go. So we have 2 tea bowls and saucers plus 1 slightly larger plate. That's not got the particular labeling that I would expect, but it certainly does. The design and patterning does say that it is part of the Vung Tau. And $200 seems to be a very reasonable price. This is a lovely lot. These are doll's house vases. And again, these are 5 pieces sold for $190. I think that's a bargain, frankly. I think that's a fantastic lot. I would have loved to have had that myself.
Now, is there a difference between people wanting to collect shipwreck porcelain specifically from cargo ships versus say shipwreck porcelain that would have come off of, I'm using like the Titanic here as an example, like other ships that carried passengers?
The circles that I've actually dealt in, and the pieces that I've looked at, have pretty much exclusively been of shipwreck cargo porcelain rather than the porcelain that was used. I'm sure there is a market for it. I'm not really aware of that market or how strong it is. It may well be a strong market. I know the market in shipwreck cargo porcelain is extremely strong.
Okay, thank you, Nate.
And regarding to the markets, like we're kind of almost in like the tertiary market, because you had it available at the time it was originally recovered, and now they're kind of being resold. So other than eBay, which is obviously going to be a good source, when you were showing some of the auction listings, it appeared to be the same auction house was showing up every time, like Rose Bearings or something like that. Are there auction houses that specialize in this, or is it just luck of the draw?
I think there are auction houses that do particularly specialize in certain things in shipwreck cargo and in antiquities. So I think that vendors tend to sell through those limited auction houses because they have the audience of buyers that truly appreciate the pieces that are there. Here's a couple of interesting items. These are simply the tops of some of the vases and urns that we saw earlier on in this, where Katie was saying how interesting it was, how beautiful. They were all in such wonderful condition. Well, here are some that are missing their bases. So again, for $30, a little over $30, it's an interesting historical item to have, not probably what I would go for my particular collection. This is another garniture set of vases and urns. These, I think, are quite large. The estimate of 2,000 to 3,000 euros was overshot by, I don't know, 100% off lower estimate. It's a particularly beautiful piece of Vung Tau. This is a Tazza. That's even though it looks like a goblet, I think they're referring to this as being something like a comport. That is a very fine piece. It's sold, I'm not sure for what amount. This is the Christie's catalog for the Vung Tau cargo, which has some wonderful, wonderful photographs in it.
Did that catalog sell for $325? Is that what the...
Yep, that's the price of this catalog.
Wow.
So this is exceptional.
The images in that are incredible.
And it's interesting that a catalog can actually sell for the same, if not more, than some of the pieces.
I'm assuming they didn't make very many copies of that particular catalog then for it to be selling for so much.
I think it's quite likely that cost reflects the desire of a collector to have the catalog of the sale alongside their actual pieces of the cargo.
Ah, okay.
And here are a few pieces that are currently for sale on eBay. 69, there's one bid on that. It's in quite a new listing. I wouldn't be surprised if that goes significantly higher. There's our Vung Tau paper label. But if we just nip into sold items, we might see exactly what. So this is a very small dish for 100, a tea bowl for 137. That seems like a reasonably good price considering the price attained and achieved by this piece.
Now, does size affect value at all? If you have a piece that is taller or larger, will that affect its value? I know that you talked about some pieces that are a little bit harder to find will be more expensive, but I'm curious about size.
Most certainly size does have a great impact on the price. of the sale price on things. The market wants big. So let's move on to the next shipwreck. This is the Diana. Now, let's see, the Diana sank. It's interesting. This is one of the few times where there is a specific date and name attached to a shipwreck. This is, oops, sorry, I need to go here. So the Diana sank on the 14th of March in 1817. It was in the Straits of Malacca, which is a narrow stretch of water between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra. It was salvaged in 1994. This particular ship was transporting goods from Calcutta, India, and Madras to China and back. So this wasn't on a European route. It shipped opium and cotton, silk, tea, ginger, and porcelain. Not sure of the size of the crew. I couldn't actually ascertain an exact number of the size of the crew. 3 were known to have drowned from the shipwreck. Also, I couldn't find the amount of porcelain that was on board, nor exactly how much was recovered. But I did read a report that over 400 bottles of alcohol for the personal consumption of the captain and his 2 British officers were found amongst the shipwreck. So perhaps it's not surprising that they hit the rocks. This is one of those bottles that was recovered with quite elaborate marine incrustation. And I think I have a slide of one of these bottles and what it's sold for. I'm not sure if I've saved it, sorry. But this is very typical pieces from the Diana. The pieces from the Diana have a certain look. This is much later than many of the others, 1817. And this is a time where the English porcelain and European porcelain would have been manufactured for so long, it would have been attainable by the middle class. And this is exactly the type of porcelain that would have been a ballast cargo rather than a primary cargo. These are 2 particularly fine and beautiful tea bowls. That's a huge price, 425 euros.
Now, what really is the best way to store these, Nate, to continue to keep its the saltiness you were talking about when it's in the marine water? What is really a good way to keep these protected over the years?
Well, at now they are free of salt crystals, so that wouldn't be a concern any longer.
Okay.
Certainly, heat or changes in temperature, vast rapid changes in temperature could well be an issue and could cause crazing damages to pieces. When I have them out, I have them displayed in my cabinets, and when they're not, they are wrapped in bubble wrap and stored in a box.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you, Nate.
So next picture. Again, this you see this is striking design here, extremely typical of the hoard from the Diana. Here's its sticker. Another example. This is a large starburst bowl. You can see the similarities. And this sold for 175 US dollars. That seems to be an extremely good price, especially considering there are so fewer of the Diana pieces on the market. Again, the bowl, it's very similar in design to the others. This achieved 300 US dollars. And this is a lovely grouping. This is a French auction site, so I can't translate much of it. Oh, I've actually translated. I did actually select a French translation, an English translation on the French. I didn't think it worked. So that's a lovely lot. And it went for 3,570 euros. That's a high price.
Wow. Do you think that's a fair price for all of that?
Well, who's to say? I mean, the prices at auction are about what the bidder and the underbidder are prepared to pay at that particular time. Whether that same lot would sell for the same or less or more on another day is really hard to speculate on.
I see. That makes sense.
And here are some Diana pieces for sale. They're at the high end, although that seems to be a reasonable price there. And again, you see the continuity of the designs at this stage. Here we go. So $616 makes the previous item here, excuse me, having sold for 300 Australian dollars makes that look very reasonable. There are only 2 sold pieces here.
Now, Nate, Crafty Jackie's got a great question. She was wondering why so much of their porcelain was blue and white.
That was about fashion. That was about taste. That is what the English market really wanted. Or in fact, that was what was in the Chinese market. And therefore, the Europeans wanted fine hard-paste porcelain. So when that came over, it was blue and white. And that started the fashion, really. It was fashionable to have blue and white porcelain, just as it's been fashionable for blue and white porcelain, like the willow pattern.
Oh, yes. The famous willow.
The famous willow. So this is the next shipwreck. This is the Hoi An hoard. This is an extremely old shipwreck. So this is the late 15th, early 16th century. Most scholars agree on somewhere between 1490 and 1520. And the pictures of these large charges is very representative of the pieces that you would find in the Hoi An hoard, just as this piece here is. Here are some of the more elaborate pieces from the Hoi An hoard. This is where the pieces stop being in the hundreds of dollar realm and start entering into the thousands and many thousands of dollar realm.
Wow, that is incredible.
So you can see this is $63,250 for this ewer. Dragon form ewer, absolutely amazing. And you can see that the motif of this bird here, the fineness of the enameling, the size, all dictate this huge price of $40,000.
And I'm sure, Nate, you might have covered this, but does the date also affect the price?
It can do. It most certainly can do. But as I say, a hoard of many hundreds of thousands of pieces can help establish a price in the marketplace that would be lower than those hoards of only 80,000 or 40,000 pieces.
Right.
Again, it comes down to so many different things. The piece itself, the size, the condition, the elaboracy of the glazing, the rarity of it, and also the perceived desire for people to have it in their collections.
Great.
Here are some beautiful examples from the Hoi An too. This is very similar. This is exactly the same sort of thing that I have in my collection of these cosmetic containers.
Those are beautiful.
Now, oops, okay. Oh, no, we've got this twice, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Here's a particularly beautiful image of this sort of libation cup from the Hoi An.
Nate, you may not be familiar with all aspects of the shipwreck porcelain, but have they ever come across or recovered pieces? Like, I'm looking at the shape of that libation cup. Have they ever come across pieces that they'd never seen before, or a shape that had never been known, or a design that had never been known?
I'm sure they would have. a lot of the work that goes into dating these shipwrecks is done by the archaeological digs of sites of potteries and kilns, and the date attributed to a shipwreck can be discerned by possibly the latest date on a coin that was found in the archaeological dig of a kiln site or pottery site in that archaeological search. So it's quite a complex process of the dating, but I think that these are professionals who look at these things constantly and know their stuff. This is a slow responding page. I selected this particular photo because I know that a lot of the wares look slightly washed out. The color palette is a little bit on the dull side and might deter collectors because it simply doesn't have quite the wow factor of some more brightly glazed porcelain. But I think this is beautifully displayed.
It really is. I love the little ways they've displayed various heights.
These are on Chinese rosewood tiered stands, but I find that particularly appealing. Here is a lot of the same, actually slightly better than the ones I have, because this is referred to as more of a pomegranate shape. This is 7 of these boxes that sold for $187. So that really is an extremely inexpensive purchase for that many pieces that are in extremely good condition for their age. That would have been a wonderful purchase at auction for whoever was lucky enough to get that. Oh, these are interesting. Now, I have a selection of photos here that are water droppers.
Is that a monkey?
That is a monkey. This is a fish. It's a puffer fish. This is a monkey. And the toad, elephant, trunk up, unfortunately, not trunk down.
He's still okay. He's got some age to him.
And a rather unusual sort of griffin water dropper. Now, a water dropper is used in Chinese calligraphy and writing. The Chinese made their ink with an ink stone, which sometimes quite an elaborately shaped and carved flat surface, and an ink stick or ink cone. And that was usually made of soot and animal glue, sometimes incense. The ink stick would have been ground on top of the ink stone, and drops of water would have been applied to create ink. What I personally can't understand is why these particular pieces were included in the cargo that was most likely headed for Europe. At the time, European ink from the 9th century up until, I think, the 17th century, it was made as a liquid. It was tannic acids from what's called a gall, which was a knotty mass found on oak trees, which was the product of wasps laying their eggs into the young tree, the tissue of a young tree, and the larva would grow inside this and produces this gall, what's called a gall, and that had a lot of tannic acid in it. That was mixed with ferrous sulfite, water, and gum arabic as a binder and to help the ink flow. So I'm unsure as to why these particular things would have been included for something that is such of an Asian usage would be included for the European market. Whether it simply had a collector value, I really don't know.
Okay, Sorry, but first, holy cats, that's like an entire deep dive right there.
Yes.
Because I've never heard of water droppers, and I have no idea how ink was made.
I haven't
But
either.
but the examples that you're showing, so the monkey and the toad appeared to be a little bit different than the bird or the griffin, I think you said it was. The
Yeah.
griffin to me, I mean, again, in a Western market, that would just be an oddly shaped vase. Like that, I wouldn't have thought that was anything others. But is there the toad I saw had a hole in its mouth? Does
Yeah,
this griffin have a hole in
I
its
think
mouth?
there's
too?
most likely a hole here,
Okay.
and your thumb would probably go over this, and slight movement of the thumb would allow the water to drip out of
Okay.
the mouth.
Because from a simple collecting ability, like that would be something the Western market wouldn't have seen. I could see them using that as a vase, but that frog, I don't see what purpose they would ever have for that other than just kind of, hey, look, cool, I've got something from the Far East.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah,
See
maybe
the
it's a
estimate.
decorative thing.
This went for $6,000 too. These are very, very popular. I don't think that this is actually as large as you may think it to be. I think this is more palm sized.
Well, it says 4.5 inches tall. I mean, there's vases that are 4.5 inches tall.
Oh, I suppose that's true. That's quite true. But see, this seems to be an extremely good price, $325 in comparison to the 3,000 estimate that this one has. But nevertheless, they're fascinating items. There was over 250,000 intact ceramic artifacts found on the Hoi An. Little known about this particular vessel. Again, this was named after the nearby town known as Hoi An. I think fishermen discovered pieces in the early 90s. Salvage was undertaken in 1997 to 1999. This was in the middle of a typhoon zone, which probably the reason for its actual sinking. This was a very complex salvage. There was pressurized cabins and diving bells. The floor bed, the seabed was 230 feet deep, and it was a 3-day decompression trip back to the surface for those working underwater. The ceramics from this particular hoard, this particular salvage, are actually considered to be the most precious and complete representation of Vietnamese artisanship and glazed ceramics, far rarer than the Chinese counterparts from ships like the Tek Sing, which is one of the other ones that we'll go into. I mean, it's also, I suppose, interesting to ponder that at this time, at this period, I think it's Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. Is that right, Patrick? Am I in the right ballpark?
You are correct.
15th century England was the War of the Roses. They were coming out of the Middle Ages and going into the Renaissance period, a time where Constantinople was considered the capital of the world, now in Istanbul. So it's quite interesting to put pieces like this into historical perspective of what else was going on in the world at that time. Now, let's see what's gone on for sold items for this one here. Very reasonable price, even though they are not particularly even attractive or interesting. $100 for a 6-inch bowl, $150 for a 9-inch plate bowl. More of the pomegranate design. This gives a much more value. This is multi-chrome as well, polychrome as well.
These are all gorgeous, but I think even the ones that are not as pretty, for someone just to have an entry piece into their collection, I feel like that would be a good option.
I was delighted to get my large plate, which is probably near identical to this. And as I say, mine was about 150 Australian dollars. Seems the market has blossomed somewhat, but for a piece of 15th, 16th century, 14th, 15th century pottery porcelain, $325 is a small price to pay, I feel. So that was the Hoi An hoard. This is the Kamal, another piece that I have represented in my collection. These are the sea sculptures. So these are pieces of porcelain that, due to the intensity of the fire on board, melted the glazes and sealed them together. They're also sealed with the marine incrustations, which in essence corals over time turn into a form of concrete.
That is fascinating.
Again, this is very similar to pieces in my own collection. 1725. Now,
Nate, this is something that we didn't talk about, but I have a feeling you probably just know. A lot of what you're showing us with the teacups do not have handles. Do you know at what point, from a dating standpoint, did teacups start getting their handles versus the tea bowls that were more common in the 17th century?
now that's a good question. I don't really know the date of when the handle arrived on a tea bowl. I'm really unsure as to that. I'm sure, obviously, that the Chinese drank their tea out of tea bowls without handles, and therefore the early pieces that went to Europe didn't have handles. I'm not really sure when the concept of the handle hit the tea bowl making industry, but that's a great question. I might have to look that up.
Okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I would assume it's a Western convention that it was more delicate to drink with a handle. So I'm assuming the Eastern market would have developed it for them.
Quite possibly.
I don't know when.
And don't be afraid about the questions. I am by no means an expert on shipwreck porcelain or pottery, nor was I particularly an expert on jasperware or English sterling silver, but I'm an avid collector, and you will probably find that my answer to many questions will be either I don't know or I don't think it is known.
And I would think with some of these things, it's just hard to know because of the age of them.
Certainly, you find a lot of conflicting information out there where one group will say it's one thing and another group will say it's something completely different. I have this exact piece in my collection as well. I used to, at one stage, knew the names of many of the patterns, and I'm ashamed to say I don't know those names any longer, or certainly not many of them. I think this is called passing boats, this particular design.
One of the questions that makes me, like when you said that you had it in your collection, some of these patterns, I'm assuming, were not unique, that it might have been a very large shipment of them going out, but the next month a different ship would have carried the exact same pattern. Is there any sort of carryover value that if you have a pattern that was part of one of these hoards, or that, I'm sorry, that was the same design but wasn't technically from one of these hoards, is there any bump in the value to that, or is it irrelevant? It's just what adds the value is the shipwreck portion.
I think the fact that they would be shipwreck adds the value. There's a little extra romance value associated with a shipwrecked, although you do find that you will see not exactly the same premise of a design executed either considerably less or considerably worse than other examples, where there's almost a rash distortion of the particular design depending on the skill of the actual artist that was doing it. Very basic and very simple piece. It's interesting, obviously, for the European market, this teapot. This is not a Chinese style teapot.
Now, what would have that small dish been used for, Nate?
Unsure. It could be a sweetmeat dish, I suppose. There's nothing to say it really had a particular use in itself. It could have been purely ornamental, as these jars probably were.
Okay.
This is a lovely catalog that has lots of fantastic images of lots of pieces.
Now, for some of the pieces that were recovered that were, say, that were significantly damaged, I know we already had the question earlier about whether things were repaired, but there's that whole concept of the shard pots where they would actually turn those pieces into something else. Do you know, did that exist for any of the smaller pieces that came out of these hoards? Like, did they actually turn it into a necklace or a box or something like that? That would have
I
been
have seen pieces from the Hoi An hoard that were fragments that had been worked into the boxes of lids. So most certainly.
And then would those have been labeled as well as from the shipwreck or the recovery process?
Quite possibly.
Oh,
quite
okay.
possibly they would have been. It's probably not universally, but quite possibly.
Excellent.
There's a number of different designs here. There was a stage where I knew what this one was called, and this one, long gone to memory now. That's passing boats there. That's not represented the most common design, which is called rocks on a terrace. I have many examples of rocks on the terrace, and it's a very interesting comparison between the skills of the particular artist. These are interesting pieces insofar as the design is so European. These are Dutch scenes on these pieces.
Those are very unique.
And very, very unlike anything that would be made for the local Chinese market. The Chinese market would have absolutely no interest in pieces like this. A nice little tea bowl and saucer. Excuse me. Now, this is a great example of the different varieties that are available in tea bowls and saucers. I hope I can find. I have an example of this particular one too. And after I've said that there's one particular design that's really common, I'm probably not actually going to find it now, which is frustrating. Here it is. This is called Rocks on the Terrace. And I've seen examples of this where this butterfly looks like a bat. This rock is so incredibly distorted. The perspective of the trellis here is really out of whack as well. That's quite a well-painted piece of Rocks on the Terrace. Yeah, it's going to prove me a liar and not show me another example. That's the same example, I think. So what else? This is quite an interesting piece. This is a fragment, but what's particularly interesting about this fragment, and I might have to blow this up. No, it's not going to actually work for me, unfortunately. This one has a very interesting astrological sign on it. It has a constellation. I think it's Orion's belt is on that particular piece. This is an interesting lot. 3 examples of the same design. These are pretty much all done by reasonably adept hands, but you can see the vast difference in the size and shape of this particular boy on the stool.
Now, you may not know this, Nate, but I'm interested in how they're putting some of these lots together. What is the reasoning behind all of them?
I think an auctioneer would make a lot from what was presented to him, with keeping in mind what he felt his market was. If he felt that there were few people interested in collecting it, he may make a larger single lot. If he felt that there were a lot of people that would go to his auctions, his or her auctions, a large amount of people that would be interested, he may well separate them out into larger, smaller lots, many more smaller lots.
Okay, I see.
These sold for $1,250. They are particularly fine examples of enamel work there. Great
Ooh.
vase. This is a magnificent piece,
Wow.
formed as a phoenix.
That is incredible.
I think that is possibly one of the most beautiful pieces of Kamal that I've ever seen.
And is that in a museum?
That is a museum, yes.
That is just incredible.
Going on to an eBay search of, again, this is Rocks on a Terrace too, which looks very different to the last piece. There were a lot of these seated babies in this particular hoard. That seems like a strong price for that pair of plates. 148 at this for this. When I was collecting this, they were at the $40 mark rather than the $140 mark.
It's amazing how much the market fluctuates over time.
These here are very reasonable. 40, 26. I see there's a bit of damage on this one here. $28. Very reasonable pricing. Excuse me. And I'm probably going very slow. I'm sorry.
Oh, Nate, this is fascinating. We're totally glued.
Now, this is the Tek Sing. The Tek Sing, the True Star. Let's go on to this piece here. This is probably what the Tek Sing looked like. Again, this is quite a recent wreck. It was sunk on February the 6th, 1822, salvaged in 1999 by Michael Hatcher, the same man who had done several of the others. And again, this is a time when rather usually they wouldn't know information about the name of the ship, and it would be named after a landmark or a town that it was close to. They knew the name of this particular ship. It was a 3-masted Chinese ocean-going junk. It was about 50 meters in length. It had a crew of 200. There were 1,600 passengers on board. Only 208 approximately survived this particular shipwreck. This was known as the Titanic of the East, and approximately 800 more people died in this particular wreck than the Titanic.
Wow.
They know that after about a month of sailing, the captain decided to take a shortcut through the Gaspar Straits. It left China on the way to Batava, which is Jakarta, and ran aground on a reef. There were about 350,000 pieces of porcelain. This is the largest amount of porcelain ever recovered from any shipwreck.
Wow.
Very simple tea bowl. But again, when displayed in a museum setting like this, this makes a rather modest item quite grand.
It certainly does. And that museum lighting and glass is just spectacular.
The lighting is absolutely key. $95 for the small dish here. I'm actually not sure what an NIS is or what sort of currency that is, but it was 600 of them. Many more tea bowls. Again, not particularly exciting, quite plain designs. This is a movie. I won't play it. I've had little luck with playing movies on these tales. This is a documentary, 40, almost 50 minutes long, almost an hour, of the recovery of the Tek Sing. So if you are interested, you can find this just by searching the Tek Sing.
And I looked it up, Nate. The NIS is actually the shekels currency of Israel.
Oh,
Interesting. Thank you. Again, not overly exciting piece. And bowls are plenty here. These are lotus bowls. These two pieces sold. They sold at auction. The original auction was a Nagel auction, and £20. These were sold for £10 a piece. Extremely affordable if someone wanted to start collecting this sort of thing. Here's some more elaborate selections of the collections here. There were a lot of these porcelain spoons, so you find a lot of these on the market.
I love how they frame them there.
That's quite a common thing to do, that you can get these framed pieces with a bowl and with a spoon, with a certificate of authenticity and an information booklet. I think this is almost exact to the piece that I have myself here. If I go back and find it. So this piece here. Now this is on Worth Point and sold in 2007. And I'm sort of got a sneaking suspicion that possibly this is exactly the same piece. And that 2007 sale was actually my purchase of it. $49 seems extremely reasonable. This is a nice little shot of the recovery process. It just flicks between these two images, but you can see the vast number of pieces that were salvaged.
That is incredible.
Now, do you know, Nate, was this something, because you had mentioned at some point they could be damaged in the recovery itself. Was this like strip mining? Like, did they just put a net down there and pull it all up? Or was it shallow enough they could send people to actually pick it out?
This was done via divers, not through diving bells or pressurized cabins. It would no salvage company would use any sort of raking method because it simply damages too many pieces.
Now, did any of the divers get a chance to keep any of the pieces, or are they all cataloged and then sold?
I don't know, but I would imagine it would be pretty commonplace that those members of that salvage crew would have the ability to have a keepsake for themselves.
Okay, great.
And again, let's look at any sold items for this particular. That's not bad prices per se. I don't find these particular pieces of this particular shipwreck but very exciting. See, this is what I was saying before, how you'd get a presentation box with a piece in it. And then let's move on to our last shipwreck before everyone goes to sleep. This is the shipwreck of the Desaru. So this was a Chinese ship. This sank somewhere between 1830, 1850s. It was discovered in May of 2001, salvaged in 2001, 2002. This was a couple of nautical miles off the Desaru beach, which is on the east coast of the Malaysian peninsula. It was actually trawlers who found this particular shipwreck. It was buoyed to alert people to the fact that it was there, but the trawling still went on. It was very active. Vast majority of the shipwreck itself was destroyed by trawling. Only about just under 70,000 complete ceramic objects were found from this. A lot of pieces from this were almost identical to pieces found on the Diana. However, the Diana cargo was mainly made for the European market, and the majority of the Desaru pieces were in a more traditional form or decoration for the tastes of the Southeast Asian market, for Burma, Laos, or Cambodia, or Thailand. This is an underwater shot of these ceramic spoons.
I love that
Again,
photograph.
it's a very interesting photo. Again, more than reasonable price for these pieces too. This is the Desaru sticker. $85 for this bowl. There are many of these teapots, this Yijing style teapot.
The shape of those are so gorgeous.
This is a little bit more expensive, this particular one. Perhaps condition drove the price for that being a little bit more expensive. And here are some of the standard examples that you would find from the Desaru. And you can see how reminiscent this and this and this is of those Diana pieces. Another auction house piece, which had a hammer price of only £20. Excuse me. I'm not quite used to talking for this long a period of time.
You're doing great, Nate.
And again, we come to the sold items, and there are some coins here, but it doesn't look like there are any Desaru pieces of porcelain that have been recently sold. So that pretty much wraps it up for my turn at the tales from the Triptych. Thank you, everyone.
This was great, Nate.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. The next tales will be on your channel, Patrick. Is that right?
That is correct. So 1 week from tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Trusty Huckster Mercantile channel, I will be telling the tales of Abington pottery. So we're going to go from Shipwreck Porcelain to middle of America, Illinois pottery. So we're going to get a very short-lived Illinois-based pottery manufacturer called Abington that I also live in Illinois, so it's somewhat local to me. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how they developed, what their designs were, and how you will probably recognize their designs because so many of their molds were purchased by other pottery manufacturers who continued those designs well into the 80s.
Fascinating, Patrick.
Fantastic. And Katie, what have you got coming up on your channel?
Got a lot of fun things for you all this week. Wednesday is my duo dive with Patrick at Trusty Huckster Mercantile. And we are going to be hosting Laura and Mary Beth from Fatbird Finds with Mary Beth's Swung Vase collection. So that will be a really interesting duo dive. I'm much looking forward to that. And then, of course, there'll be some other fun content coming out on my channel as always.
Fantastic. Patrick, before the next tales on your channel, what have you got coming up? A sale, I hope.
Yeah, actually, we've got a couple of a lot of activities this week. Again, I'll be part of the duo with Katie, duo dive with Katie and Fatbird Finds. But before that, on Monday, tomorrow night, both Katie and I will also be on Vintage Rescue Squad. So that'll happen Monday night. And then on Thursday, I will actually be a part of two sales. So I will be on the channel of Beth at Carolina Princess Sweet Treats and Pretties. I'll be on her channel for a joint sale with her at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then I will have my standard sale also later that evening at 8 p.m. Eastern on my Trusty Huckster Mercantile channel.
Fantastic.
Great.
Well, thank you, everyone, for bearing with me. Thank you for watching. I've enjoyed doing my homework for this. There was a lot of information that I didn't know that I came across in the process for researching for this particular episode. I look forward to seeing you all in a chat real soon. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing all of this. Talk to everybody later.
Bye, friends.